episode 4. And for April, it is Autism Awareness Month, or as we like to call it, Autistic Acceptance Month. And so that should not be just the month of April. That should be all the time, by the way. But we are back with Bec, and we are here also with mom and friend, Lauren.
Thank you.
As Bec said in our last episode, one person's experience is one person's experience. We cannot possibly take on the responsibility of speaking for an entire community. Lauren, we are going to toss it right over to you. And this is our parent perspective episode. Mm-hmm. So we wanted you to just kind of talk about yourself and let us know a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, I'm Lauren. I live here on Long Island, and I have a family of 4. I have 9-year-old twins, Raymond and Christina, and my husband, Ray. And, Ray and I met doing theater, and of course, Christine that way. Goodness, I mean, right now I'm working as a voiceover artist at home, which has been very exciting and kind of my pandemic shift. In terms of my family, so I have my twins, Raymond and Christina, and Christina is neurotypical and Raymond is autistic. So that has been, that has definitely been quite the journey, and continues to be. He was first evaluated for services when he was not quite 3. So he received like a speech evaluation, psychology evaluation, behavior, and that was based on speech delays. He was verbal, but certainly not to the extent his sister was, which initially didn't raise many flags with me. His pediatrician at 18 months was kind of like, oh, there's no words yet, like not even mommy or daddy, like you might want to look into getting an evaluation. She's like, look, I'm super cautious, but you might, and at that point I started looking into things, but didn't really proceed with it. I'll always remember being in the park. I used to take them in the double stroller in a park nearby. There was there's like a walking path, and I would take them every day and do like a few laps around that. And I would go around the same time every day. So I'd see a lot of the same people taking walks, and I would see these 2 women all the time. And this one woman stopped me one day, and she was like, I'm so sorry. Like, please tell me if I'm being presumptuous and all this kind of thing. But I see you all the time here with your kids, and it's so great that you're coming out and taking a walk. And, she's like, but I can't help but notice that your son doesn't look up at the trees and doesn't look up at everything around him. He's always looking at the wheel of the stroller, which was 100% true. Almost all the time on this walk, Raymond would be looking over the edge of the stroller and watching the wheel turn. And there could be, birds flying and people going by and all kinds of things happening around. And that's what he looked at. And she's like, I don't know if she said she was a special educator. She worked in a special ed preschool. She's like, I see this all the time. She's like, you might really want to have him evaluated. I'm so sorry if I'm overstepping and whatever. And I was just kind of like, okay, no, thanks. But, it was just one of those things where I didn't know this woman. And even though I knew she was trying to be helpful, it was like, who are you? You don't know me. You don't know my kid. You don't know what he's like at home and how much he engages in different things at home. It's not like he's just staring at a wheel all day. That's just, he finds that fascinating, and of course I didn't say this to her. This is what I'm thinking in my mind,
Yeah.
And it probably wasn't until my, I guess we'll say stepmother at the time, pointed out to me at about 2.5, again, shortly before we got this evaluation, that she's like, Lauren, I just have to say this, that, I'm concerned, like, she's like, I really hope I'm wrong, but, I've been doing some research online and, and looking at these, the symptoms of autism. And I mean, this is Raymond. She was a family member. And because she was someone who spent a lot of time with Raymond,
Yeah.
I guess that's what finally let me say, yeah, yeah, you're right. You know, um, and I'll always be thankful to her for that. At the same time, I was thankful and resentful because now all of a sudden, all the things that were quirky about my son that I found charming and sweet and unique about him, now I was suddenly looking at as symptoms or deficits or problems, you know. And I'll never remember, I'll never forget like calling my pediatrician and being like, I think my son might have Asperger's. What should I do? You know, and then they directed me because of his age that, it would be through our school district. Um, and that he would be evaluated for qualifying for early intervention services, but because he was about to turn 3,
Yeah,
it was no longer early intervention. It would be through the school district. So we never had services come to our home.
yeah,
But we took him to be evaluated at a local special needs preschool. And, before the test was even done, the psychologist was like, I mean, he's definitely going to qualify for program, and I was like, okay, um,
mm,
and I remember having like a pre-screen conversation with like an administrator and, thinking like, I'm sure he's one of those like in the middle kids who like there's stuff going on, but they're not going to qualify for services. Like I remember thinking that and expecting
yeah,
that. So for
yeah,
this psychologist to tell me before she even finished that, like, oh, well, definitely that, and then I remember her asking me if I'd like to do the CARS, which was the child autism rating scale, which was a test for me, not for him, um, to like determine how many symptoms of autism he was showing. And
yeah.
at the time, I answered in such a way as to make him sound as, quote unquote, to meet normal or not having these symptoms as possible. Like not that I was lying, but I would answer in a way that was representative of his best day, you know?
Right, right.
And something I will since tell, and, right now tell any mom who or parent or a guardian or whatever who's having a child evaluated, you want to talk about their worst day and you want to talk
And
about,
adult. Let me
yes,
just jump in. If you're
yeah,
being late diagnosed, talk about your worst day. Very important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, while we're like switching over to Bec for a second, I actually do just want to bring up
yeah,
uh one thing in hearing this. And I worked in the field of special education for 16 years, so I remember, like, I was in charge of the babysitting when parents would go for parent training, and there was an entire night called Welcome to Holland, and it was all about how you anticipated that you were taking a trip to Italy and it was going to be beautiful and lovely, and then you wound up in Holland. And what is that like? And that was pretty much the experience of having a child with autism, is kind of like how they defined it, is like you anticipated going to one place that is beautiful and has one set of incredible things, and you wound up in this other place that has other incredibly wonderful and different things. They are both beautiful, but you had an expectation to go here and then you wound up here. So what do you do with that difference of expectation? And so, Bec, I kind of just want to like toss it to you for a second from your perspective, hearing the parent mindset of like, oh no, this stranger is saying it could be this thing. And oh no, like, I think within the autistic community, from what I've been hearing and from what I've been researching, there is this like, autism does not have to be this like my life is over kind of thing. So
Yeah.
the stigma around the autistic diagnosis can be so painful for parents, I think, because of that shame, because of that, oh no, not my kid. Oh no, this is going to be like life ending. So I don't know, just hearing Lauren talk about that, it hurts my heart for you, Lauren, but also just thinking about like parents in the future, if there was greater acceptance of neurodiversity, what could that diagnostic process look like if it
Yeah.
wasn't one so filled with shame and fear and denial and like, but not my poor child. And listen, that is so understandable, because I'm not a parent, Bec isn't a parent, so like we can't speak to no, not my baby, because like that is such a real thing for any mom, mama bear, like whoever you are. But I don't know, Bec, if you can just kind of speak to that for a second, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I do think that there is still, even after all of these years of advocacy for acceptance, so much societal stigma about what it means to be autistic, what it means to have a diagnosis, what it means to like slap a label on a kid or on yourself if you're an adult going to go get that evaluation. And the thing that really, like the moment that was really piercing my heart was when Lauren was talking about all of those wonderful things that I found so quirky and so charming about my son. All of a sudden I was thinking of them as symptoms. And like, that's just so painful because like they can absolutely be both things. And a lot of us, I would say, prefer to depathologize autism and consider them autistic traits as opposed to symptoms. Symptom is a very clinical term that can be very uncomfortable for a lot of us. So like I think, at least about myself, that some of my autistic traits, the ones that are less difficult for myself and for my loved ones to deal with, are cute. Like they are quirky and they are charming. And they are things that make me, you know, a little bit special and a little bit different and maybe a little eccentric. So like, I just hope, I mean, like, it seems like you're on this journey of really embracing neurodiversity. And I'm thrilled by so many of the things that I heard you say before we started recording. I know we'll get to talk a little bit more about that later, but I hope for anybody listening to this, if they are looking at themselves or they're looking at their child and they're thinking, we may need to do some evaluation here, that they don't lose that delight in those differences that are wonderful and that are special. And, you know, I want to be real, like there are some things that are extremely challenging about being autistic. Like not every autistic trait is a wonderful thing. It's not all a walk in the park. But those things that we can embrace,
way to bring it full circle.
Thank you. Those things that we can embrace about ourselves and about our community and about our loved ones, we absolutely should. They can be absolutely wonderful and charming and quirky.
Like, I think one thing that was helpful for me, like, so, you know, I did that CARS test, and at the time, and I think largely because I was sort of, you know, again, not necessarily lying, but not leaning into, you know, his autistic traits. And so at the time, I was told he displays some symptoms, which was their term, you know, of autism, but at this point, you know, it didn't qualify for a diagnosis. And so, but he definitely did qualify for services. So at 3 years old, like in the middle of the year in January, he started preschool, and he was in a 611 class. But I was told that this is what would be appropriate for him, along with speech therapy 3 times a week. So it was kind of like, well, okay, this is what we're doing. And I will say that one thing that was very helpful for me, so he didn't end up getting a diagnosis until a year later. And I think one thing that was very helpful for me in my journey, of kind of coming to terms with everything, was that he was in a special needs preschool, with kids who had a diagnosis. And I was around moms who had kids who had a diagnosis for a year before he got his diagnosis. And that was very helpful for me. And what you were saying, back to destigmatize it. So that I could see, like, look at these beautiful kids, you know, like, you know, I'd see them walking in the hallway, and it's not like I would know, well, that one has a diagnosis and that one doesn't, or, you know, this is the class for kids who have a diagnosis. And that, do you know what I mean? Like, it was, you know, this wasn't a school for autistic kids. It was a school for kids who have special needs, whatever those may be. And so I think that was very helpful for me to realize that, you know, and to talk with other moms, and understand that, okay, you know, if he does end up being diagnosed, that is not some end of the world situation. And it doesn't change who he, you know, he will be the same child, you know, he will just now have this diagnosis. And what brought us to pursuing the diagnosis was that his, I guess, case manager or IEP manager at the time, you know, informed me through various meetings about a program in our school district that was specifically for children with an autism diagnosis who are, and again, I'm trying to move away from this term, but high functioning. And, you know, and that so that you needed the diagnosis for this program, but this program was specifically designed to give these kids the support they needed in kindergarten so that they could then transition to a general ed environment. And this sounded so great to me. And as I kind of talked around in my circles and heard about the teacher of this program and heard such phenomenal things about her and all this stuff, I was like, yes, this is where he needs to be. This is the program he needs, and it's in our district. And how great is that? But he needed the diagnosis for that program. So I was like, okay. So I, you know, started calling all around, and it takes forever to get an appointment, certainly pre-pandemic. I can't imagine now. But, you know, I was told, you know, you call every doctor on this list and you take any appointment they'll give you. And then if you get an earlier appointment, you cancel your other appointment, you know, like I was kind of given this whole, like what the procedure is to do. He was talking to me for about 45 minutes. So of course, Raymond's like, you know, like there was nothing for him to do. He started playing with the phone in the room and just pressing buttons and like intercomming everyone, you know, and I was like losing my mind trying to get him to stop doing that. And meanwhile, the doctor's just asking me all these questions and having me go over all the reports and all the things that were already there in a stack. He wasn't even looking at Raymond or engaging with Raymond at all. His back was to him. His back was to me. Finally, at the end of this evaluation, he spent maybe 90 seconds engaging with Raymond, maybe 90 seconds, basically testing his reflexes. And then was kind of like, yeah, autism, come back in 6 months. And I was like, what? You know, like, I mean, it was absolutely mind blowing, you know. Now, look, I could acknowledge even then that he was in a room with Raymond for 45 minutes. But I'm like, you know, you don't need an autism diagnosis to have a young 4-year-old child like be kind of scratching the walls after like having to be in a room for an hour with nothing to do. You know what I mean? But anyway, but you know, again, I wasn't in denial, I wouldn't say at the same time, because it was like, this is why we want, like, you know, part of me wanted this diagnosis because I wanted him to have this educational, you know, opportunity that required the diagnosis. So really a large part of me wanted it. But of course, if I'm being honest, I also didn't want to hear it, you know, and I certainly didn't want to hear it like, yeah, he checks the box. Yeah, okay, hand flapping. Okay, yeah, repetitive activities. Okay, yeah, autism. Like it was literally like he might as well have been like, yeah, you have a cold, go get some Dimetap. Like, you know, I was like, I guess this guy diagnoses 10 kids a day or something, but like someone needs to talk to him about how to talk to parents. I remember them asking me if I wanted to book a follow-up appointment, and I was like, no, like I'm never coming here again, you know. and I got in the car, and it was just me and Raymond. You know, my husband was home with my daughter, and I just remember crying for like like I couldn't drive for like a long time. And I just felt so bad because I felt like, you know, there's Raymond, you know, does he know why I'm crying? I hope he doesn't crying about him. You know what I mean? Like I had those thoughts going through my head. I just couldn't stop. But at the same time, you know, the next day I was okay. You know what I mean? Like the next day I felt like, okay, I had this huge emotional catharsis about this. And I guess because I did think that like I kind of knew, and I kind of realized like, yeah, this is probably what we're dealing with. And because I had this year of being in the special education universe, and you know, being in a support group, a parent support group at that school, and talking to moms whose kids did have a diagnosis, and you know, and all of these things. And being able to, again, like you said, realize that I may have walked into this situation with a stigma because I wasn't educated about what it is and what it means, and like legit, at my age, the main representation I had of autism in my life was Rain Man, and
Oh boy.
I've literally had people say to me like, oh,
Yep.
so your son's like Rain Man, and like these are like educated people I respect, and like, and it's like, well, no, not at all, actually. No.
Yeah.
Like,
And what's incredible is, like, I think I've probably been a part of like the universe of autism longer than either of you, because my brothers are 37 and 35, or they're soon to be 37 and 35. And so like I can remember when when Dustin Hoffman's depiction of Rain Man was like, thank God Rain Man exists as a character, because that's the only depiction of a person with autism. And that's the only way that autism is being represented in the mainstream media. And so like, if they can say, oh, you mean like Rain Man? At least you're like, at least like somebody. Yeah. And now every time somebody brings up Rain Man, I'm like, nothing like Rain Man. Just shut up. Like, come on. And so it's like so interesting that like within my brother's lifetime, it has gone from, yes, thank you God, Rain Man exists, to like, But I actually do just want to double back, because Lauren, when you brought up high functioning, you did kind of like air quoted a little bit. You said you want to stay away from that. And I know that's something that I've really been reflecting on as well. Bec, I do want to bring it to you for a second.
The way the criteria is set up right now with autism spectrum disorder levels 1, 2, and 3 is often used against the diagnosed individual as well. If someone is diagnosed as level 1, they are often denied support services and accommodations because they are too high functioning, she puts in quotation marks. Someone labeled level 3 can have their agency taken away from them because they are considered too low functioning. This arbitrary level system is based on outward behavior and ignores the fact that the level 1 individual is most likely struggling, and the level 3 individual still has the thoughts and understanding to make decisions for themselves. As long as autism diagnosis is based on behavior, and as long as ABA is the recommended treatment plan covered by insurance companies, because like that's pretty much it in the United States, like that if you're going to get some kind of services for your kid, your insurance company is very likely to only cover ABA. And if you want something different, you're going to have to pay for out of pocket, which isn't accessible to a lot of people. Clinical diagnosis will continue to be inaccessible and unreliable for the majority of autistic individuals. So I just thought she put that so beautifully. So I just wanted to read it to you exactly as she said it, because I think that really speaks to my experience as somebody who is called high functioning and who just very recently would have been diagnosed with Asperger's if they hadn't changed the diagnostic criteria, or if I had been diagnosed in the UK, my diagnosis still would be Asperger's today. It is frustrating because I think that, as I get older, a lot of my struggles have gotten worse. And what's happened, because I don't have any support services, is that I rely on my spouse to be my support worker so much. And like, we love each other so much, and he is so caring and compassionate toward me. But I do kind of feel like if I could have help and not have put everything on the person who's supposed to be my life partner, that would probably be better for us and our marriage and our household. But I'm not sure if I will ever be able to access all of the support that I need, because if I look and sound too high functioning, then I don't need it.
Something that's so interesting for me is that, most of my life, people have said to me, oh, so are your brothers high functioning or low functioning? And for my entire life, I've struggled to answer that question, because they are not a box you can check off on a form. They are two very different people. And like, Tommy is somebody that struggles immensely, but is also so incredibly focused and independent in other ways that I'm like, this kid could like run his own business and like run it better than most businesses are run, because he's so fastidious in other ways. And I'm like, damn, Tom, my goodness. Like he would make sure that everything is like to the T. And it's incredible. And then Michael's memory is like phenomenal. Like you could ask him anything about Disney ever, and he knows like the voice actor, he knows the year the movie was made, he could tell you anything about it, all the different songs. And I think a lot of people quantify that as like just a quirky autistic behavior, who cares? And it's like, but he's brilliant, and I don't care if he's brilliant by anybody else's standards. I can't remember all the things that he remembers, so he's brilliant to me. And so for somebody to just be so reductive about, so are your brothers high functioning or low functioning? It's like, well, is your brother high functioning or low functioning? Well, my brother's not autistic. Well, I don't care that your brother's autistic. Is your brother functioning? Like, we don't ask, are neurotypical people high functioning or low functioning, right? Like there's people out there in the world that are neurotypical that are not functioning very well, but we don't label them that way.
Right.
And it's such a difficult thing, because we have to encapsulate these people as if they aren't three-dimensional human beings. And it always just hurts my heart for my brothers, because I'm like, they are just so much more than any box you could possibly give me to put them in. And so when trying to answer that question, I'm always like, they are themselves. They have so many areas that they need supports in, and they have so many areas that they are phenomenal. I don't know how else to answer your question.
Yeah.
Is usually what I say. And the person's like, yeah, but like high or low. And I'm like, oh my God, never mind. I'm done talking.
One thing that you mentioned about like support, and something that I've noticed again in like trying to seek out autistic perspectives just on social media, is relating to the high functioning and low functioning. I've seen autistic individuals talk about, we'd prefer high support needs or low support needs, which I think is interesting from my perspective as a parent. Even that, that kind of clarifies it to me, what you're talking about of like, that's not an easy box, because if I think about Raymond in our home environment, right, when he is at home, I would say he is no support needs. Okay. He is extremely independent. Now, again, he's 9 years old. Raymond will wake up on his own. He will get himself, he'll get dressed. He'll come downstairs. He'll pour himself a bowl of cereal. He'll eat his vitamins. He'll put the cereal bowl in the sink. He'll brush his teeth. He'll make sure he's got all that settled, and then he'll come in and ask me, can I have my iPad? I did all my things. And actually the other day, he even said, I was like, yeah, okay. And I gave him his iPad. And then I walked in and I was like, did you empty the dishwasher? He's like, yeah, the dishwasher was open, so I thought I should empty it. And he took it upon himself to do that without being asked, So I'm like, wow, like, again, take your average neurotypical 9-year-old. I don't know how many of them are doing that, right? So again, in our home, I would say there is no additional support that we provide Raymond that we do not provide Christina. I probably monitor his homework a little more just to make sure he's kind of getting it done, whereas I don't necessarily feel the need to do that with Christina. But again, I don't think that's related to, the fact that he's autistic so much. However, in the school environment, he has very high support needs. He has been in various educational settings over the years, between being in a general ed classroom, being in an integrated classroom, being in a classroom, a self-contained classroom of all kids who have some level of special needs or another. But, all throughout school, he has, received speech therapy, he's received occupational therapy, he receives social emotional counseling once a week. He has a one-to-one aide. He has a chart, that's maintained documenting, positive and negative behaviors, so that we have data to evaluate how things are going. It's very high support needs at school, and it does seem to me that all of that is necessary. The idea of high support needs and low support needs is challenging, because it really depends on the environment. you know, in our case, in Raymond's.
Yeah, no, it really does. I actually, I've seen a little bit of back and forth between autistic adults about whether to even use that, like that high support, low support, or if that itself is too reductive and like almost as bad as the level thing. So one thing that I've seen that, well, actually two different things that I've seen that have been extremely wonderful. One is more of a metaphor and one is more of a scientific way of doing it, is instead of looking at it as a spectrum, because that's actually quite difficult. You're like kind of putting people like in one box at the end or one box at the middle or one box kind of, you know, like it just doesn't really work that well, is when you get this sort of pie chart with all these different autistic traits that are around it in a circle. And depending on the autistic person and the circumstances that they're in at home, at school, at work, whatever it is, the trait might be, you know, quite a bit of it. So it's extending way out to the circle, like the edge of the circle, or maybe it's not an issue for them at all. And so it's like right next to the center of the circle. And so what you end up having is like all these very unique graphs. And I've seen a lot of autistic people share them, where they've got these like interesting, like zigzagging lines all within the circle of like where communicating verbally is like way out on the edge of the circle, but like communicating and writing is near the center of the circle. Totally great. Like physical coordination for some people is like way out here, some it's in the middle. Some people have issues with just their fine motor skills. Some people have issues with their fine and the gross motor skills. So like there's all this. And then the fun metaphor version of it is imagine that you're going to a froyo place and it has all of these different toppings, and every autistic person is like at the froyo buffet, and they've all got different spoonfuls of different toppings. And some of us have overlapping toppings. Some of us have same amounts of things. Some of us have different amounts of things. And some of us have traits that other autistic people do not have at all. Like, so like, I just think that, looking at it in a circle or like a toppings bar is just so much more clear than a spectrum or levels or high support or low support, because everybody is so different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love I love that metaphor so much. That is just so absolutely perfect, because it's so true, right? Like maybe there's a person who's like, excuse me, I'm allergic to most of this. Can I please have the thing that you have behind the counter that you don't ever put out for anybody? And then somebody else is like, how did you get coconut? You know, like
yeah.
there's probably all sorts of different ways in which we don't even realize as a society that autistic traits can manifest, because it manifests differently for each person. And Bec, it makes me think of how you were talking about your sister Hannah and how she was very, very obviously autistic.
Yeah.
And how you,
yes.
like when we look at autism as a spectrum, if she is autistic, you are not autistic.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
It's either you are or you're not. You're in a box or you're out of the box. And so being able to look at it as the full expanse of the diversity that people are trying to get embraced more now as a community, I think is just so important, because it really highlights that notion of like, there's so many different ways. And you know, like the old adage of, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. It's been around for forever. Yeah. And it's a good one. I don't mean to mock it, but you know, it is a cliche for a reason, because it's true. But at the same time, I think we need to lean in a little bit more to it, because it isn't just you've only met one person. It's that person looks one way at one given moment, and that one person can look completely different in 100 different settings in 100 different moments. And so I think what's so challenging about that is people don't like change. People don't like things that are difficult to understand. People don't like things that are like unpredictable. And so to have the ability to identify this neurodiverse person could be different at any moment in time is scary to somebody and is challenging to somebody, when in reality, we are all different at every moment. We are all like,
yeah,
I could be happy one minute and angry the next minute. And, you know, that has nothing to do with a diagnosis or not. It's just because we're people. And yet, because we are so focused on the neurodiverse piece, we label it as that, when in reality, it's just the human experience.
I know. So as an educator, because I'm an English teacher, like that's very weird to me that like we're so focused on that just for neurodivergent people, because all of my students, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical, all have strengths and gaps. They all have things that are just like really wonderful and unique about them, or that they're really, really good at and have high knowledge and skills. And they all have things that they need extra support and extra work and extra time to improve. So like, it's all of us, we all have this. And the idea that neurodivergent people are somehow exempt from the complicated human experience is just so incorrect.
Yeah. So if you could just kind of talk about your growth and learning experience, because I think sometimes we as people, and I'm going to speak for myself in this now, when you know a community and you believe that you are doing what is best and you know how to advocate for them, you can sometimes become complacent in the terminology that you use, in the way in which you advocate for them. And so for me, I was using person-centered speech. I was using like I lighted up blue. I mean, for goodness sakes, I have blue puzzle pieces tattooed on my body now, and I'm like, oh no, what do I do with that? Like, you know, I mean, so like, I was very much a person that was like the autism community and a person with autism, and you know, all of these things, until speaking with Bec, reading more, watching more, listening more, and really going, I need to learn and I need to grow. And so I think that there are some loved ones and advocates within the community that are very in their pattern, in their, I know what I'm talking about and I don't need to change. And I want to lovingly and respectfully say, let us learn and let us grow. And so I just want to hear from you, Lauren. What has that experience been like for you? Because it has been a eye-opening experience and a heart-broadening experience for me. So I'd love to hear your journey.
Yeah. I mean, I think initially my, efforts to educate myself and, be an advocate for my son. I mean, there's so many pieces to it, but, a lot of it came from trying to look at it from I'm very into health and nutrition. So I was studying that whole piece and like, looking at, diets for autism and all that. Not that we ever really implemented that in any kind of super strict way, but like that was what fascinated me and what I was, trying to educate myself about and what I was, and I've been in support groups and really connected with lots of wonderful people. And I've been, really fortunate that my son has had just incredible, educators on his team, wonderful, special educators and therapists and all of that. But it really was very recently that it just kind of occurred to me. And again, I think it might have been that like one or two people who do have these large social media followings kind of popped up on my feed through whatever hashtag or whatever it might be, but that I started, seeing some, actually autistic folks talking about their experiences or expressing opinions online, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, I should be listening to this, I should be following this, and for the most part, they were younger adults, probably early 20s or thereabouts, and I responded to something that someone had posted asking like, do you prefer person with autism or autistic person? I usually refer to my son as being on the spectrum, or I'll refer to my exceptional son. And that came from of course, on the spectrum is very commonly used, and the idea of exceptional, that came from, I was first introduced to that idea from my son's kindergarten teacher, who's like, are you familiar with the term twice exceptional? And I was like, no. She's like, well, that's Raymond. She's like, look into it, and so I did research there, and it was like, whether it's an autistic person or someone with ADHD or any other neurodivergent element that, someone who has exceptionally strong, exceptional strengths, but then also, has special needs. And I loved that term. To me, that I was able to embrace that wholeheartedly, because it was like, yes, that's Raymond. He's got these incredible, he was reading entire books when he was 3. He, so many amazing things. And then, yes, these challenges, and also he's a twin, and oh, I'm a twice exceptional mama. I have a son who's twice exceptional, and I have twins, and like that felt like something I could embrace really proudly. But somebody on this social media thread, when I mentioned that, was like, just so we as autistic people, or many of us, we tend to think of the term on the spectrum as a euphemism. And for you to call your son exceptional could be, or yourself as an exceptional mom, or, whatever, could be like you're co-opting his neurology, which was like, whoa, and she said, like, look, this is just meant as education and a perspective. And I said, wow, thank you. I appreciate that. But if that really took me aback. But when I stopped for a moment, if I'm being really honest with myself, I was using on the spectrum as a euphemism, because I was walking, when I first walked into the experience, or was first presented with the experience of, my son is autistic, you know, again, I had that year of processing to realize it wasn't the end of the world. But if I'm being honest, it was still a negative connotation. It was still not something I wanted to hear. And I think because I think that by and large, it still has so much stigma around it, it's like not how I want to introduce my son to people, perhaps. And again, this is just me trying to be really honest about where I was coming from, and
Yeah.
where for me the idea of exceptional allowed me to acknowledge the differences, and acknowledge the struggles and the deficits, but to also, because exceptional can mean good or bad. So for me, that was like a really empowering thing that felt good. But it just made it clear to me that I really needed to be listening to autistic voices, and that maybe some of these, some of this language that felt empowering to me, and maybe if I'm putting it out there in the broader world, maybe it's being disrespectful to the actually autistic community. um, and and I'm entitled to my language and to how I want to, whatever. But I do need to be mindful of the actually autistic community, like the community that I'm, purportedly trying to support and lift up, because that's, what my son is a part of, so yeah, it kind of became my mission this April to not make it be about my voice and me labeling myself as an exceptional mom and this and that and the other thing, but to really find all different perspectives from actually autistic people, whether they be icons like Temple Grandin, or someone I found on Instagram who maybe has 10 followers, but just made this great post about, whatever,
Yeah.
and how important to listen to that. And I think it really is so important to have, lots of different perspectives. But a friend of mine who has 2 autistic sons, one who is mind-bogglingly brilliant, I mean, absolutely next level brilliant, and another son also also autistic, who is nonverbal, and who has to, who I believe lives in a assisted living facility. And so she truly has the experience of having children on truly both, if we're going to use the spectrum euphemism, truly both ends, or the pie chart, whatever you want to call it. Truly has a diverse experience, let's say that. And she said, in a very respectful way, like, oh, I love Greta's great, but it bothers me when people make it that autism is just being a little different. She's like, it bothers me when people are afraid to use the term disability, because because she's like, for my brilliant son, he's incredibly frustrated by his autism, incredibly frustrated by it. And for my other son, he can't tell me how he feels about it.
Yes, I just want to echo that and say to anyone who is listening, disability is not a dirty word. Let's demystify that. Let's destigmatize it. Let's use it. I'm not special needs, I'm disabled.
Yeah.
Proudly, I am pleased to be part of the disability community. Disabled people are awesome.
And I just want to say, Lauren, I just really commend you for your ability to be so transparent, for your willingness to be so open today, because I think it takes a lot of strength to be able to admit, like, if I'm being honest with myself, if I'm being honest with like you all right now, if I'm being honest with the greater YouTube community, like whoever's going to see this, this is what was going through my mind. This is what was on my heart. And that's not an easy thing to put yourself out there like that. And I think that sometimes we in like 2021 can see people sharing from their heart and believe that they are of a certain status or believe that they are of a certain like celebrity. And in reality, like the three of us are just regular people going about our lives and just sharing together in deep conversation, to learn and grow together with each other. And to be able to put yourself out there in such a vulnerable way is incredibly beautiful and just so full of strength. And I just really admire that in both of you, honestly. And I just appreciate it so much because it is not an easy thing. And it is definitely to be admired. It's important for me to always kind of be advocating for a piece of the community that may not be represented. And within this conversation, we've talked a lot about like, we don't like using high functioning, low functioning, so on and so forth. But most parents that are going to listen to this podcast or watch this podcast that do not have the experience of their child independently getting themselves ready for school and emptying the dishwasher without being told and all of those things might have a certain sense of resentment, might have a certain sense of, well, isn't that nice that your child's autism presents that way? And Bec, isn't that nice that your autism is this and that? And again, I'm not trying to say that I feel that way, but I need to speak to that person's experience as well, because it's important to me that we are not, this is the face of autism. It is, there's so many different experiences. And so what would you say, Lauren, or Bec, to, actually we'll do both of you, but Lauren, if it's okay, we'll start with you. What would you say to a mom that is having an experience with their child's autism that is so very disabling, that they do not have a level of independence that certainly your son has or that Bec has, and it is way more of a dramatically life-altering experience? Because I know working in the field, I encountered a lot of families that were very often saying things like, well, it's very nice that autism is just like a thing for you, but for us, it is everything, everywhere, all the time. We can't do this, we can't do that. And so I do not want to vilify or demonize autism as a diagnosis. I don't want to put moms on blast or anything like that, but I do feel like it's really important to kind of speak to the heart of those moms, because very much the way you said, Lauren, that you were trying to empower yourself by using that exceptional mom term of like, I get to give myself a pat on the back. I work damn hard to like be the best mom I can for my kid. And so there are moms out there just trying to do the best they can too. So what would you kind of say to those moms that are really struggling with helping their child, but their child struggling so profoundly, and just watching this episode, wishing that this was their child's experience? What would you say to them? And I know that's not, it's a big question, right? So
Yeah.
like, it's not about having the right answer so much as whatever's coming up for you on your heart.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, because I know I've sat in support groups, many a time, kind of feeling like an imposter. My kid's autism was not presenting in the same way as these
Yeah.
other parents who were just dealing with a far more dramatic situation. Parents who, whose kids are nonverbal, whose kid knocks their head against the wall all night, every night. Parents who get phone calls every day that their kid has run out of the school building and they have to have trackers on their kids, like these kind of stories. So obviously I can't speak to that personally. But I think from what I'm, experiencing lately and trying to do, is that, seek out the actually autistic voices, and to maybe get some insight into, what is going on there. Um, Again, I mean, I'm, just seeing so many things online, the Facebook group that I've, come into recently, that I've gotten a lot of interesting information from. It's called Autism Inclusivity. And the point, it's administered, the admins are all autistic adults. And the purpose of it is for moms, teachers, therapists, people who love and work with autistic people, to be able to ask the actually autistic adult community questions. And it can be a hard group to be in as a parent. I'm not going to lie. Like, I've, I don't even think I've posted anything in there, and I've gotten schooled, and I keep seeing people get schooled. So it can be hard. Like, you have to walk in, again, just as you said earlier, Christine, like, with an open heart and being prepared to hear some things that are hard, because, as parents, we may have been advocating in a certain way, whether it's, wearing blue and wearing puzzle pieces and talking about, again, I was never of the mindset that we needed to find a cure for autism, but I know parents who are,
Yeah.
and as much as I see what feels very wrong to me about the idea of finding a cure for autism, as a parent, I can be sympathetic to parents whose child is nonverbal, banging their head against a wall all night long, running away from home, doing all these things that don't, that are just so disturbing, and not having any answers. As a mom, if that were my kid, yeah, I'd probably want to find a cure for that. Like, so I can have sympathy there, while understanding that this isn't, we need support and advocacy and understanding, not a cure. Or at least that's how I feel. So I feel that for those parents who are in those more difficult situations, I know for me, it's like, the next thing I want to do is find an adult autistic mentor for my son. I want to find someone in their early 20s, who is, you know, who is happy and feels at home, and who's proud to be autistic and is functioning successfully in society, whatever that may mean for them,
Yeah.
and have them be like a big brother for Raymond, because they're going to be, there's only so much I can do as a neurotypical person to speak to his experience.
I love the idea of you finding an actually autistic person to mentor Ray.
I haven't done like lots of research. That's something that kind of just struck me very recently, but I did like a quick little search, and like that kind of thing exists, but I don't know that it exists locally. I was like, where's Big Brothers and Big Sisters Autism Edition? Where's It Gets Better Autism Edition? Yeah, like to me,
God, that's such a great idea.
Right? Like
it really is.
That's what needs to happen, because yeah, like, and again, I think it's so important that, I love my support groups that I go to, my parent support groups, and I miss them so much. They went online, and then like 2 people showed up, and now it's like, no, I need to like be in the room with these people. But, again, there's only so much there, and that's for me, which is important. I need to take care of me if I'm going to take care of Raymond. But, the one thing I didn't say is like, it struck me, and part of my whole like kind of idea of like, okay, let's listen to and amplify autistic voices, is like, with very rare exception, very, very rare exception, everything I know about how to be a parent to and advocate for my autistic son has come from neurotypical people. And they might be the best, most wonderful neurotypical people in the world, and they may have 1 million letters after their name, and they may have 25 years of experience working with autistic people. But at the end of the day, learning from Bec, learning from actually autistic people, is provides a value that I can't get elsewhere, and I want him to have that.
I love that. All right, Lauren, that is your life's mission. No pressure, but you need to create Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Autism Edition. You have said it out loud. You put it into the universe. There you go.
That's so cool.
Thank you, Lauren. Bec, before I go to you, I just feel like there is so many moms on my heart right now that I just kind of have to like bear witness to for a second, that like I have been in their homes, I have held their hands as they've cried, I have hugged them as their child has been really, really, really struggling. And so it's very important for me to just feel like I am being authentic, I guess, to my experience as a professional, to my experience as a sibling, to be advocating for acceptance and also to be honoring the experiences that I've had in my life, both personally and professionally. And so for all of those parents who might be listening or watching and feeling like, Christine, are you forgetting like that moment in my living room? Are you forgetting that moment that I was hysterically crying? Are you forgetting those like years of our life together? Are you kidding? I just feel so moved to say it is so important to me that all autistic experiences are represented and that we can just learn together and that we can love each other, because I think so often there is resentment of an easier autistic experience for some people than others, which I think is such a damaging notion in and of itself, that like, oh, well, Lauren's life is easier and Bec's life is easier. Like, no, hard is hard. And like, if you're drowning in 5 feet of water versus 50 feet of water, you're still drowning. And so I think it's so important to kind of acknowledge, like, it doesn't matter the depth of water that any person or family member existing in the autistic realm is struggling with. If they're struggling, and that's it. And there needs to be less judgment on that, I think, because it can be so incredibly hurtful, and we within the community are perpetrating that stigma upon each other. And that can't be. It just can't. So that's just what's coming up for me. And I just kind of had to bear witness to that for a second. But Bec, I would love to hear from you if there's anything that you would want to say to, I know we focus a lot on moms, but parents in general. I don't mean to leave dads out of the conversation, because certainly I know some tremendous fathers and single dads within our community as well.
Within the autism community, and when I say the autism community, I'll clarify the autistic community, like the people who are self-advocates, who are able to communicate in some way, whether that be verbally or using some kind of communication device or writing about their experience. Unfortunately, there is discrimination and stigma even amongst ourselves. And I think it's very important to take this opportunity to address that issue. There is a problem with high functioning or Asperger's supremacy, even within the community of people who are autistic. And there's also problems with other marginalized identities being further marginalized, trans and non-binary people, women, and people of color, especially Black and Brown people, and their experiences in what's supposed to be a supportive community being quite terrible and marginalized. So yeah, I just want to say that if you feel like your family is in 50 feet of water and not 5, I want to validate that there absolutely might be a different level of marginalization or difficulty for you. And like, while autism for me is my everything and is in my everyday and in every single second of every single thing that I do and experience, my limitations certainly look and sound different than other families' limitations and other people's limitations. So seek out the voices in the autism community that are marginalized. Make sure that you're listening to Black autistic people, brown autistic people, non-speaking autistic people who are sharing their experiences in a different way besides verbally talking about it. It is so important to make sure the diversity of the autistic experience is honored and acknowledged and spoken about. And yeah, I think it's just unfortunately a product of human nature and just our society that even within this community itself, we have issues of supremacy and superiority complexes. So I just want to know that anyone who's listening to this, I want them to know that that is on my mind and on my heart. And I don't want you to feel further marginalized by anything that we're saying or doing today. And I'm willing to be schooled. So like if anybody who wants to, speak back to anything that I have said, feel free to comment on this and let me know how your experience differs than the way that I've represented it. Because what Christine said at the beginning is very true. Like, I'm just one woman. So like my autism is my autism. And like, I may have met a lot of other autistic adults who have shared certain experiences and traits with me, and like met a bunch of people who I feel like I have a whole lot in common with in various online communities, but that doesn't mean that everyone is experiencing it the same way. And we have to stop making white people the default in this conversation. We have to stop making cis people the default in this conversation. And we have to stop making speaking people the default in this conversation, because there are a lot of non-speaking autistic people. And while many of them do not, in fact, have any intellectual disability, they simply have a physiological problem that keeps them from using their mouths to articulate themselves. Like, they're just not listened to. They're not provided with the communication devices that they need, and they're not provided with the educational supports that they need to use those devices in order to express themselves to the world. So yes, please, if you have not looked further than kind of like a white speaking experience of autism, go out there. The resources are all online, and there's books that you can buy. There are books you can buy by non-speaking autistic people. So yeah, like, just diversify what you think of when you hear the word autistic person. Make sure it's not just Rain Man.
That seems like a perfect place to end right there. All right, ladies, thank you so much for being here with us today. And for everyone watching, we will be continuing our Autistic Acceptance Month anthology, I suppose. I don't know, whatever you might call it. And so next week we will be, let's see, this is premiering April 16th. And so next week we will be on with educators, Renee and Chris, and also their cousin, Chris, who is actually autistic. And so we will have a very, very interesting conversation with them, their family experience, their professional experience, and I look forward to sharing that with you all. We will be back with Bec next week. Thank you so much to Lauren for being here with us today. Take care, ladies.
Hi, it was so nice to talk to you and meet you. I really loved this talk.